The call came in just before dusk. A child missing. Last seen near Hawthorne Park. Temperature dropping fast. Snow had started falling again, thin, sharp flakes that felt more like ice than winter magic. Patrol units circled the neighborhood. Flashing lights reflected off frozen windshields and empty swings. And in the middle of the playground stood K9 Atlas. He wasn't moving. Officer Daniel Ruiz tightened his gloves and stepped out of the cruiser. Atlas had worked dozens of searches. He was methodical, disciplined, precise. But tonight was different. The dog wasn't tracking a scent down a trail. He was staring at the ground, specifically the frozen pond beyond the jungle gym. Atlas, Daniel called calmly. The German Shepherd didn't look back. His ears were forward, muscles locked. Low growl rumbling from deep in his chest, not aggressive. Urgent. The child's name was Lily Harper. 6 years old. Pink boots. Purple coat. Reported missing 20 minutes ago. Her mother was hysterical, her father pacing in circles near the patrol tape. Search teams had already swept the wooded perimeter. No tracks leading away, no witnesses, just fresh snow covering everything like a blank page. Except for one place. Atlas stepped forward, one paw onto the pond's surface. The ice creaked. Atlas. Back. Daniel snapped. The dog retreated, but only 2 steps. He circled, sniffed the air, returned to the same exact patch of ice. Then he barked. Once, sharp, commanding. Officers exchanged looks. "It's too thick to break," one muttered. "That pond froze weeks ago." Daniel didn't answer. Atlas barked again. Then something changed. The dog lowered himself flat against the ice, pressing his nose down, sliding it across the surface like he was tracing something underneath. Daniel's stomach tightened. "Flashlights," he ordered. Beams cut across the snow-dusted pond. The ice looked solid. Opaque. Nothing visible beneath. Atlas suddenly pawed hard at one spot. The ice cracked. A hairline fracture. Then another. Daniel's pulse spiked. Rope. Now. 2 officers ran for the truck. Atlas ignored the chaos. He scratched again, whining now, high-pitched, desperate. And then Daniel saw it. Beneath the ice, faint, a small shape. Purple, frozen just below the surface, Daniel's breath left his body. "Get the rescue team, she's in there," the father screamed from behind the tape. The mother collapsed. Officers rushed forward with poles and rope harnesses. Ice shattered in controlled blows. Water surged upward. Atlas tried to lunge in. Daniel grabbed his harness. "Stay." The dog trembled violently but obeyed. A diver broke through the hole. Reached down. Seconds felt like hours. Then, "I've got her." They pulled Lily from the freezing water, her coat stiff with ice. Lips blue. Eyes closed. No movement. Daniel didn't think. He dropped beside her and began CPR. 1 compression. 2. 3. "Come on, kid." Atlas whined beside him, nudging Lily's hand. Then a cough. A weak, fragile cough. Water spilled from her mouth. She gasped. Everyone froze. Then chaos erupted again, but different now. Hope exploding through the cold air. Paramedics rushed her into the ambulance. Sirens roared. Daniel stood there shaking. Atlas didn't celebrate. He stared at the cracked ice. Still. Focused. Growling again. Daniel followed his gaze. The ice hadn't broken randomly. There were marks. Scratches, like someone had tried to climb out. From underneath. Daniel's chest tightened. This wasn't just an accident. And Atlas knew it. The dog suddenly turned and bolted toward the tree line. "Atlas!" Daniel shouted, sprinting after him. The shepherd disappeared into the woods. Snow swallowed the sound. And then, a scream echoed through the trees. Not a child's, an adult's. The scream didn't last long. It cut off the way a radio does when someone slams the off switch. Daniel crashed through the tree line, branches whipping against his face. Snow swallowed his boots to the ankles. His breath burned in his chest. "Atlas," he shouted. Up ahead, the German shepherd's silhouette moved fast between the trees. Focused. Hunting. Two officers followed behind Daniel, struggling to keep pace. The woods behind Hawthorne Park weren't large, just a strip of winter bare trees separating the playground from a service road. But in the falling snow, visibility was shrinking by the second. Then Daniel saw him, a man on the ground. Atlas stood over him, barking, not biting, not attacking, just holding him there. The man's hands were raised. "I didn't do anything," he yelled. Daniel approached carefully, hand resting near his holster. "Step away from the dog," Daniel ordered. "I was just walking. I heard shouting." Atlas didn't move. He stood rigid, blocking the man from standing. Daniel looked down. The man's boots were soaked. Not just snow-soaked, water-soaked, up to mid-calf. Daniel's eyes sharpened. "Why are your boots wet?" he asked quietly. "I slipped near the pond. I tried to help." Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Help who?" "The girl. I saw her fall." Daniel's mind raced. The parents had said Lily had been playing alone for just a few minutes. No one had mentioned another adult. "You didn't call 911, I panicked." Atlas growled again, low and steady. His nose pressed toward the man's right glove. Daniel noticed something else. Scratches. Across the man's knuckles. Like he had clawed at ice. Daniel crouched slightly. "What's your name?" "Mark Ellison, ID." The man hesitated. Atlas's growl deepened. Slowly, Mark reached into his coat pocket. Daniel tensed, but the movement produced a wallet. Driver's license confirmed the name. Local address. 3 blocks from the park. One of the officers leaned close to Daniel and whispered he could have tried to pull her out. Daniel nodded slightly. Possible. But something wasn't sitting right. Atlas suddenly shifted his attention. He moved around behind Mark, sniffed the back of his coat. Then he barked, short, sharp. Daniel stepped closer. There, faint but unmistakable purple fibers clung to the man's sleeve, the same shade as Lily's coat. Daniel's voice hardened. "Turn around." Mark swallowed. "I told you, I tried to help. Turn around." Handcuffs clicked in the cold air. Mark didn't resist, but his eyes darted toward the pond. Not toward the ambulance. Not toward Lily. Toward the pond. Like he was calculating something. Atlas stopped barking. Instead, he stared at the man's face. Watching. Reading. Snow continued falling, covering footprints almost as fast as they were made. Daniel looked down at the ground around where Mark had been standing. There were only one set of adult tracks leading from the pond to this spot, not 2. If Mark had pulled Lily out, there would have been rescue drag marks. There weren't, which meant something else, something darker. They escorted Mark toward the patrol car. As they passed the pond again, Daniel glanced at the cracked surface. Something glinted near the edge of the break. He knelt and brushed away snow. A small mitten. Pink, frozen into the ice. But it wasn't torn, it hadn't slipped off, it looked placed, deliberately. Daniel's stomach dropped, he stood slowly. Atlas followed his gaze, then the dog did something unexpected. He walked back toward the tree line, not to where they found Mark, further down, nose low, tracking. Daniel frowned. "What is it, boy?" Atlas moved with purpose now, slow, careful, not frantic like before. Daniel followed. About 20 yards into the woods, Atlas stopped at a cluster of bushes. He pawed at the snow. Daniel brushed it aside. Underneath, a child's sled, half buried. Rope handles snapped. Daniel's pulse quickened. Lily hadn't mentioned sledding. Her parents hadn't either. Why was there a sled hidden in the trees? Atlas sniffed the sled intensely. Then he turned his head toward the service road beyond the trees. His body stiffened again. Daniel felt it. That shift. That instinct. There was more. This wasn't just a neighbor who saw a child fall. This was staged. Daniel stood, scanning the road. Tire tracks. Fresh. Leading away. He radioed dispatch. Run the name Mark Ellison. Full background and check traffic cams near Hawthorne Service Road in the last hour. Static, then confirmation. Mark sat silently in the cruiser staring straight ahead. Atlas refused to get inside. He sat outside the patrol car door, watching the man through the glass, snow collecting on his back, unmoving. Daniel opened the rear door slightly. Atlas. Load up. The dog didn't move. His eyes were locked on Mark. Daniel studied the suspect's reflection. Mark's breathing was shallow, controlled, but his right knee was bouncing. Nervous. Not scared. Calculating. Daniel closed the door again. He crouched beside Atlas. You think he didn't act alone? Atlas's ears twitched. The radio crackled. Unit 12, dispatch. Go ahead, we've got something. Mark Ellison filed a restraining order last year. Against who? Against a woman named Sarah Whitmore. Daniel felt a cold ripple move down his spine. Relation? Listed as former partner. Custody dispute. Daniel's jaw tightened. Lily Harper's mother's maiden name was Whitmore. Atlas suddenly barked once. Like punctuation. Daniel slowly stood. This wasn't random. This wasn't panic. This was targeted. But the question was worse. If Mark Ellison had a restraining order involving someone connected to Lily's family, then tonight wasn't about a child slipping on ice. It was about something planned. Something personal. Daniel looked toward the ambulance lights disappearing down the road. Lily had regained consciousness, but she hadn't spoken yet. And if this was intentional, if someone had put her under that ice, then this wasn't attempted rescue. It was attempted murder. And Atlas knew it before anyone else did. Snow kept falling, erasing evidence, burying secrets, but Atlas wasn't done. As officers prepared to transport Mark, the dog suddenly lunged forward, not at the man. At the passenger side floorboard, scratching furiously at the cruiser's front seat. Daniel froze. What is it? Atlas barked. Scratched harder. Daniel opened the passenger door. The scent hit him first. Gasoline. And something else. Sweet. Chemical. He leaned down and lifted the rubber floor mat. Underneath, a small vial, clear liquid, unlabeled. Daniel's blood ran cold. Mark wasn't just near the pond. He came prepared. The scream in the woods hadn't been fear, it had been frustration. Because Atlas had interrupted something. Something that was supposed to look like a tragic accident. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, steady and sharp. This just got bigger, he whispered. Atlas sat back on his haunches, watching, waiting. Because somewhere beyond the snow and flashing lights, there was still a missing piece, and they hadn't found it yet. The interrogation room was too warm. Mark Ellison sat alone at the metal table, wrists cuffed in front of him. His wet boots had been removed. Socks damp. Pants rolled slightly at the hem. He didn't shiver. He stared at the wall like he was already rehearsing his story. Through the observation glass, Officer Daniel Ruiz stood with folded arms. Atlas lay beside him, but not resting. Watching. Always watching. On the table in front of Daniel sat 3 items in clear evidence bags. The pink mitten, the small vial, and a photograph of Lily Harper taken just hours earlier in the hospital. Alive, wrapped in blankets, breathing. Daniel exhaled slowly. She's stable, the nurse had said. Mild hypothermia, early water inhalation. But she was conscious. She had spoken 1 sentence. Just one. He told me it was a secret game. Daniel closed his eyes for half a second. Secret game. He stepped into the interrogation room. Atlas did not follow, but he stood when Daniel left the observation area, ears high. Daniel sat down across from Mark. You said you tried to help her, Daniel began evenly. I did. You slipped near the pond. Yes. You panicked. Yes. Daniel slid the bagged mitten across the table. Mark's eyes flickered. You recognize this? It's the girl's. It was frozen into the ice. Not torn, not dropped mid-fall. Placed. Mark said nothing. Daniel placed the second bag down, the vial. "What's this?" "I don't know. It was under your floor mat. I don't know how it got there." Daniel leaned back. "You filed a restraining order last year." Mark's jaw tightened slightly. "That's irrelevant. Against Sarah Whitmore." Silence. Daniel's tone shifted, softer now. Controlled. "Sarah Whitmore is Lily's aunt." Mark's eyes lifted for the first time. Barely. But enough. "So?" he said. "So you've had ongoing legal disputes with that family. That has nothing to do with tonight." Daniel watched every muscle movement, every breath. "You know what Lily told medical staff?" Daniel continued. Mark didn't respond. "She said someone told her it was a secret game, still nothing." But his right hand twitched, almost imperceptible. Daniel leaned forward. "She said the game was to be very still under the ice." Mark's composure cracked, just for a second. Then it returned. "That's ridiculous." Daniel held his stare. "You're right," he said quietly. "It is." He stood abruptly and walked out without another word. Mark's eyes followed him this time. Outside the room, Daniel met Detective Karen Holt, who had just arrived from Major Crimes. Karen was sharp, calm, analytical. "What do we have?" she asked. Daniel handed her the vial. "Lab's running it now." Karen studied Mark through the glass. "Do we have motive?" "Custody dispute with the aunt. History of harassment complaints that didn't stick." "Financial strain. Recently fired from a contracting job." Karen nodded slowly. "And the sled?" "Hidden in the tree line." Rope snapped. Karen looked at Atlas. The dog had shifted position. He wasn't facing the interrogation room anymore. He was staring down the hallway, toward the exit, ears forward. Daniel followed his gaze. A nurse from the hospital was walking quickly toward them. She looked uneasy. "Officer Ruiz?" she asked. "Yes. It's about Lily." Daniel's stomach tightened. She remembered something else. "What?" The nurse hesitated. She said there was another voice. The hallway felt suddenly smaller. "What do you mean another voice?" Karen asked. She said when she was under the ice, before she fell in, she heard someone say, "Not yet." Silence fell heavy. Not yet. That wasn't panic. That wasn't an accident. That was timing. Daniel's eyes slowly moved toward the interrogation room. Mark was alone in there. But if Lily heard two voices, then someone else had been there. Atlas suddenly stood up, completely rigid now. He let out a low, controlled growl. Karen frowned. What is he reacting to? Daniel didn't answer. He walked toward the station entrance. Atlas moved ahead of him. Outside, snow continued to fall. The service road beyond the station was quiet, but Atlas pulled hard on the leash, not toward Mark's cruiser, toward the impound lot. Daniel quickened his pace. Inside the lot, Mark's vehicle sat isolated. Crime scene tape wrapped around it. Atlas began circling the car, sniffing carefully. He paused near the trunk, barked once. Daniel signaled the technician. "Open it." The trunk lifted, empty, except for a tarp. Atlas jumped up, nose deep against the fabric. Growling again. Daniel pulled the tarp aside. Underneath, another pair of boots. Smaller. Women's size. Wet. Karen's voice was tight. He didn't act alone. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. Atlas jumped down. Then he did something unexpected. He turned away from the car, sat down, and looked directly at Daniel. Waiting. Daniel understood that look. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't agitation. It was certainty. Atlas had smelled someone else at the pond, someone who wasn't here. Karen's phone buzzed. She answered quickly. Yes? Her face changed. What kind of footage? Pause. How clear? Longer pause. Send it now. She lowered the phone slowly. Traffic cam near Hawthorne Service Road caught a second vehicle parked 15 minutes before Lily went missing. Daniel's jaw tightened. Plate? Registered to Sarah Whitmore. The world seemed to tilt. "That's Lily's aunt," Daniel said quietly. Karen nodded, and the restraining order was against her. Atlas stood again, tense. Daniel's mind raced. If Sarah had been there, if Mark had been there, then what was this? A setup? Revenge? Or something worse? Karen exhaled slowly. "We need to bring her in." Daniel nodded, but something didn't sit right. If Sarah had wanted to hurt Lily, why call the police immediately? Why stay at the park hysterical? Why nearly collapse when they pulled Lily out? Atlas suddenly pulled again, hard, back toward the woods. Daniel didn't hesitate this time. He followed. Snow crunched under boots as they returned to the tree line. Atlas moved with precision now, retracing. Back to the bushes. Back to the sled. He sniffed it once more, then moved past it. Further. Deeper. Daniel's heart pounded. They hadn't searched this far yet. Atlas stopped at a clearing near the service road. He sniffed the ground intensely, then pawed at something buried under snow. Daniel brushed it aside. A cell phone. Screen cracked. Powered off. Karen knelt beside him. "Bag it." Daniel turned it over carefully. On the back, a small sticker. A sunflower. The same sunflower sticker Lily had on her backpack. Karen's voice was barely above a whisper. "This isn't Sarah's," Daniel swallowed. "It's Lily's." Which meant she had been here, before the pond, before the ice. Atlas slowly lifted his head, listening. Far in the distance, an engine started. Daniel looked toward the service road. Headlights flickered through the falling snow. A car pulling away. Karen's eyes widened. "Go." Daniel unclipped Atlas's leash. Track, the dog exploded forward, snow spraying behind him. The car accelerated, too far to catch on foot, but Atlas wasn't chasing the car. He veered sharply left, toward a ditch running parallel to the road. Daniel followed, lungs burning. Atlas leapt down into the ditch, sniffed frantically, then barked, urgent and loud. Daniel slid down beside him. There, half hidden under snow, a second set of footprints, smaller, leading away from where the car had been parked, leading into the woods, not toward the pond. Away from it. Karen's radio crackled. "Detective, lab results just came in on the vial." She grabbed it. "Go ahead, it's a mild sedative." Liquid form. Pediatric dosage. The world narrowed. Sedative. Secret game. 2 voices. Second vehicle. And a child told to lie still under ice. Daniel's chest tightened. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't custody drama. This was staged from the beginning. But the footprints in the ditch meant something else. Someone had left separately. On foot. Before the car drove away, Atlas growled again. Low. Focused. Daniel stared at the tracks disappearing into the trees. They weren't random. They were careful. Measured. Like someone who knew exactly how long they had before the snow covered everything. Daniel stood slowly. If Mark was the distraction, Karen finished the thought. Then someone else planned the timing. Atlas looked up at Daniel, eyes sharp. Because somewhere in these woods, the second voice was still out there, and they were running out of light. Night swallowed the woods. Searchlights cut through falling snow in pale white beams. Officers spread out in a tight grid formation. Radios crackled. Boots crunched. Breath fogged. Atlas didn't need the lights. He had the trail. Daniel stayed close behind him, leash loose but ready. The smaller footprints in the ditch were already fading under new snowfall, but Atlas tracked beyond what human eyes could see. Slow. Methodical. Focused. They moved deeper than anyone expected, past the service road, past the boundary markers of Hawthorne Park, into private property. An abandoned summer cabin sat ahead, barely visible through the trees. Karen came up beside Daniel. That cabin belongs to the Whitmore family. Daniel's stomach tightened. Sarah Whitmore, Lily's aunt. The second vehicle on camera. But if Sarah had been involved, Why stay at the park? Why scream for help? Why nearly collapse when Lily was pulled from the ice? Atlas stopped 10 yards from the cabin. Hackles raised. Low growl. The cabin lights were off. No smoke from the chimney, no visible movement. But the front door wasn't fully closed. It swayed slightly in the wind. Daniel signaled 2 officers to flank the sides. He approached slowly, gun drawn. Police. Announce yourself. Silence. Atlas stepped forward first, nose working. Daniel pushed the door open. The smell hit immediately. Gasoline. Faint, but fresh. Inside, the cabin was dim, only moonlight spilling through frosted windows. Furniture covered in white sheets, but one sheet had been disturbed, a chair dragged out. On the wooden floor near it, a small pink scarf. Lily's. Daniel's jaw clenched. She was here, Karen whispered. Atlas moved further inside, sniffed the air, then headed toward the back room. Daniel followed. The back room wasn't a bedroom. It was storage, boxes, tools, plastic bins, and in the center, a metal folding table. On it sat an open backpack, children's coloring books inside, and a half-empty juice pouch, recently opened. Daniel felt his pulse in his throat. Atlas circled the table, then stopped at a wooden crate pushed against the wall. He pawed at it, hard. Daniel pulled the crate aside. Underneath, a floor hatch. Karen looked at him. You thinking what I'm thinking? Daniel didn't answer. He lifted the hatch. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. Cold air rose from below. Atlas didn't hesitate. He moved down first. Daniel followed close behind. The basement was small. Concrete walls. One hanging light bulb, and on the far side, a camera mounted on a tripod. Pointed at a section of cleared floor. Daniel's blood ran cold. The camera was still recording. A red light blinked. Karen whispered, "This wasn't about killing her." Daniel understood immediately. It was about control, about fear, about staging something worse. Atlas growled, louder now. He wasn't focused on the camera. He was staring at the far corner. Daniel turned. A figure stepped from the shadows. Not Sarah, a younger woman, early 20s. Blonde hair pulled back tight. Snow still clinging to her boots. She froze when she saw them. For half a second, nobody moved. Then she bolted. Up the stairs. Stop. Daniel shouted. Atlas launched forward. The woman burst through the front door into the snow-covered yard. She slipped, caught herself, ran toward the trees. Atlas closed the distance in seconds. He didn't bite. He tackled, hitting her mid-leg and driving her into the snow. Daniel reached them quickly, flipping her onto her stomach and securing her hands. Don't move. She struggled once. Then went still, breathing fast, panicked. Karen knelt beside her. Name, silence. Name, Megan, she whispered. Megan who? She hesitated. Megan Whitmore. Daniel felt the pieces slam together. Sarah's daughter. Megan closed her eyes. Tears mixed with snow on her face. It wasn't supposed to go like this, she said shakily. Daniel's voice was firm. Then tell me how it was supposed to go. She looked at Atlas, still standing over her, eyes sharp and steady. He said we'd scare them, she said. Just scare them. Who's he? She swallowed. Mark? Karen's tone hardened. Scare them how? Megan's composure cracked. He said if Lily went missing, if it looked like Sarah's negligence, it would destroy her in court. Daniel's chest tightened. Custody dispute. Reputation. Control. But the ice, Karen pressed. I didn't know he was going to put her in the water. Megan cried. He said we'd keep her at the cabin. Record a message. Make it look like Sarah was unstable. Daniel's mind flashed to the basement camera. This wasn't random violence. It was calculated manipulation. And the sedative? Daniel asked. Megan shook her head rapidly. He told me it was just to make her calm. So she wouldn't cry. Atlas let out a low rumble. Megan flinched. I swear, she whispered. I didn't know he was going to do that. Daniel studied her face. Fear, shock, regret, but also something else. Denial. "You were there," he said quietly. "Lily heard you." Megan's eyes widened. She heard me? She heard someone say, "Not yet." Megan's breathing faltered. That was me. Snow continued to fall around them. "She was supposed to wait until Mark set the camera," Megan whispered. "He said the timing had to be perfect." Daniel felt a deep, controlled anger rise inside him. Perfect for what? Megan's lips trembled. He wanted the rescue to fail. Silence fell heavy. Karen's voice was ice cold. "You knew?" Megan shook her head violently. "I didn't think he meant it. I thought it was just talk." He was angry. He blamed Sarah for everything. Atlas stepped closer. Megan froze again. He said if Sarah lost custody, he'd win everything back. The house, the money, control. Daniel looked toward the dark woods. Mark Ellison hadn't panicked. He had calculated. And when Atlas interrupted, he'd screamed, not from fear, from frustration. Karen stood slowly. This just became attempted homicide and conspiracy. Daniel nodded. But something still bothered him. He looked at Megan again. "When did you leave the pond?" She blinked. I left before he broke the ice. Why? He told me to. Said I'd mess up the timing." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "And you just listened?" Megan hesitated. "I was scared of him." Atlas tilted his head slightly. Daniel noticed. A subtle reaction. Atlas wasn't convinced. Daniel leaned down closer. "Megan, if you're lying to protect him, it's over. We found the camera, the sedative, the sled, the boots." She shook her head. "I'm not protecting him. Then what are you protecting?" Megan's silence stretched too long. Atlas suddenly barked, sharp and loud. Megan flinched. Daniel's voice dropped lower. Who else knew? Her eyes flickered, just once. Karen saw it too. "There's someone else," Karen said. Megan whispered, barely audible. "He said he had a backup." Daniel felt the air shift. What backup? If something went wrong, if Lily survived, he said there was someone who'd make sure the story still worked. Daniel's blood ran cold. Who? Megan's eyes filled with tears. He wouldn't tell me. Snow fell harder now. Searchlights cut through the trees. Atlas stood still, listening. And far off in the distance, a car door slammed. Daniel's head snapped toward the sound. Karen grabbed her radio. "Units, we have possible additional suspect near North Perimeter." Atlas was already moving. Not toward the road, not toward the cabin, but back toward the pond. Daniel followed instantly, his heart pounding. If Mark had a backup plan, and if Lily survived, then someone else might be trying to finish what failed. And this time, they wouldn't use ice. Atlas ran like a shadow cutting through snow, not wild, not confused. Direct. Daniel could barely keep up. His lungs burned as icy air tore through his throat. Behind him, Karen shouted orders into her radio, redirecting units toward the pond. The playground lights were still on, yellow halos against white ground. Empty. Too empty. Atlas didn't slow. He veered past the frozen pond, past the cracked section where Lily had been pulled out toward the parking lot beyond. Daniel saw it then. A dark SUV idling near the far curb. Headlights off, engine running. Atlas's pace changed, lower, faster, focused. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, mid-40s, heavy jacket. Baseball cap pulled low. He didn't look surprised, he looked annoyed. "Police." Daniel shouted. "Hands where I can see them." The man glanced once toward the woods, calculating. Then he moved, not toward Daniel, toward the ambulance bay road leading to the hospital route. Daniel's stomach dropped. He's heading toward the hospital. Atlas launched forward before the command even left Daniel's mouth. The man ran, slipping on packed snow but staying upright. Fast. Too fast. He reached the SUV's rear passenger door and yanked it open. Inside, a camera, mounted, pointed outward, streaming. Daniel saw the small blinking light. Live feed. The man dove into the driver's seat, engine revved. Atlas leapt. He didn't go for the man, he went for the tire. His body slammed against the SUV's side panel just as the vehicle lurched forward. The impact wasn't enough to stop it, but it threw off the driver's angle. The SUV fishtailed. Daniel sprinted to the driver's side window, stopped the vehicle. The man's eyes were cold, determined, not panicked. He accelerated again. Atlas recovered instantly, chasing alongside. Daniel saw what the man was aiming for. Not the hospital, not escape, the pond, the cracked section of ice. If the SUV broke through, it would look like an accident, like a grieving relative losing control, like chaos. And the live camera would capture everything, spin it, twist it, blame it on the police response. Mark's backup plan. Daniel ran harder than he ever had. Atlas. Out. The dog veered ahead of the SUV's path, then turned sharply, directly in front of it. For one split second, everything froze. Headlights flicked on, blinding white. The SUV didn't slow. Daniel's heart stopped. Atlas. At the last possible second, Atlas pivoted, leapt sideways, but not away, up. He hit the hood with full force, claws scraping metal. The driver swerved violently. The SUV jerked left away from the pond, smashing into a light pole with a deafening crack. Airbags exploded. Silence followed, thick, heavy. Daniel reached the vehicle first. Atlas was already on the hood, barking through the shattered windshield. The driver tried to crawl across the seat. Atlas snarled, loud and commanding, not attacking, holding, pinning him in place psychologically. Daniel ripped the door open and dragged the man out onto the snow. Cuffed, secured. Karen arrived seconds later. Name, she demanded. The man spat blood into the snow. Victor Hale. Daniel froze. The name clicked. Victor Hale, a freelance videographer. Recently hired, according to court filings, by Mark Ellison to document behavioral inconsistencies of the Whitmore family during the custody dispute. This wasn't just manipulation, it was staged narrative warfare. Daniel yanked open the SUV's back door. Inside were multiple recording devices, laptops, hard drives, pre-written statements printed out. One headline template caught Daniel's eye. Negligent aunt allows child to wander onto thin ice. He felt sick. Karen leaned in beside him. He was going to release it immediately. Daniel nodded grimly. Control the story before the truth caught up. Atlas jumped down from the hood, trotted to Daniel's side, breathing hard, but steady. No injury, just focus. Daniel crouched and gripped the dog's harness for a brief second. You saved it, he whispered. Sirens filled the air again as additional units arrived. Victor Hale was pulled to his feet. He glared at Daniel. You don't understand, he muttered. Daniel's voice was ice. No. I understand perfectly. Atlas suddenly turned his head. Ears sharp. Listening. Daniel followed his gaze toward the hospital route again. A thought hit him like a punch. Karen, she looked at him. Mark knew Lily survived before we announced it publicly. Karen's face drained. The live feed. Daniel nodded. He was watching. Karen grabbed her radio immediately. Hospital security locked down pediatric wing. Possible accomplice monitoring situation. Static. Then confirmation. Daniel looked back at Victor. Who else is involved? Victor smiled faintly. You already caught everyone that matters. Daniel studied him carefully. It didn't feel finished. Atlas didn't relax. He remained alert. Scanning. Daniel stood slowly. Search his devices now. Officers began seizing equipment. One technician called out, Sir, there's an active upload scheduled. Where to? Multiple social media accounts. Timer set for 15 minutes from now. Karen exhaled sharply. He planned to crash through the ice, create chaos, then push the footage live. Daniel nodded. And if Lily had died, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Atlas stepped closer to Victor, staring up at him. Victor's jaw tightened. "Get that dog away from me." Atlas didn't growl. He just held eye contact. Unwavering. Victor finally looked away first. Snow settled quietly over the wrecked SUV. The pond remained intact, the narrative shattered. Within minutes, cybercrime units confirmed the upload had been stopped. All accounts frozen, all footage seized. Victor Hale was transported in silence. Daniel stood at the edge of the pond once more. The cracked ice reflected flashing lights. Atlas sat beside him. For the first time that night, he seemed calm. Not because it was over, but because the immediate danger had passed. Karen approached slowly. "Mark's talking," she said. Daniel glanced at her. He folded when he heard Victor was caught. "Full confession?" "Everything. The sedative, the staging, the plan to blame Sarah publicly and destroy her credibility before court." Daniel exhaled. "And Megan?" She admitted to assisting, but claimed she didn't know he intended to put Lily under the ice. Daniel looked down at Atlas. "What do you think?" Atlas blinked slowly. "Steady." Daniel nodded slightly. "She knew more than she's saying," he murmured. Karen agreed quietly. But without Atlas, she looked toward the crash site. This would have ended very differently. Daniel scratched behind Atlas's ear. The dog leaned subtly into the touch. No celebration. No dramatics. Just quiet understanding. But then Daniel's radio crackled again. "Officer Ruiz, go. Lily is asking for the dog." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, a long night finally catching up to him. "She's awake?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Fully conscious." Daniel looked down at Atlas. The German shepherd's ears lifted immediately, like he understood every word. Daniel smiled faintly for the first time that night. "Let's go see her." As they walked toward the cruiser, Daniel looked back once more at the frozen pond. Hours ago, it had been a crime scene, a near tragedy, a calculated attempt to control truth through fear. Now, it was just ice again. Still, silent. But Daniel knew something deeper. None of this unraveled because of technology. Not because of confessions, not because of paperwork. It unraveled because one dog refused to look away. And somewhere inside that instinct, that refusal, was the reason a little girl was still breathing. But the final moment of this story was waiting at the hospital. Hospitals at night carry a different kind of silence. Not peaceful, not calm, just heavy. The pediatric wing was quiet when Officer Daniel Ruiz walked in, Atlas at his side. Nurses paused. A few smiled softly. Word had already traveled. Room 214. Daniel stopped outside the door. Through the small glass window, he could see Lily Harper propped up in bed, blankets tucked around her shoulders, ivy line taped gently to her arm. Her parents sat close, her mother gripping her hand like she was afraid the world might steal her again. Daniel knocked lightly. Lily's eyes lifted. They weren't afraid. They were searching. "Is he here?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Daniel opened the door. Atlas stepped in slowly, carefully. No sudden movements. The room shifted the moment he entered. Lily's breathing changed. Her fingers twitched. Atlas approached the bed and stopped beside it. He didn't jump. He didn't whine. He simply rested his chin lightly on the mattress. Lily reached out with trembling fingers and touched his fur. "You found me," she whispered. Atlas blinked once. Slow. Steady. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. Her father stood and walked over to him. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly. Daniel shook his head. "Thank him." Lily looked down at Atlas. "He was barking before I fell," she said softly. Daniel exchanged a look with Karen, who stood near the doorway. "What do you mean?" Daniel asked gently. Lily swallowed. "When we were walking, he wasn't supposed to see me yet. But he started barking. Like he knew. Her mother frowned. Walking with who, sweetheart? Lily's small hand tightened slightly in Atlas's fur. Mark? The room stilled. He said we were going to play a game. He told me Aunt Sarah was sad and this would help. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. He said I had to be very still, that it would only be for a minute. Daniel kept his voice calm. Did he say anything else? Lily nodded faintly. He said if I moved too soon, everything would be ruined. Atlas shifted slightly, pressing closer to the bed. Daniel understood something then. Atlas hadn't just smelled fear. He'd smelled tension before Lily ever reached the pond. He'd reacted before the ice broke. Because dogs don't understand custody disputes. They don't understand court strategy. They understand body language, tone, stress, predator intent, and Atlas had recognized it instantly. Lily's mother leaned forward. Did Megan say anything? Lily thought for a moment. She looked scared, she said quietly. She kept looking at the trees. Daniel felt the final piece settle. Megan hadn't been the mastermind. She'd been complicit. But frightened. Victor had been the architect of narrative manipulation. Mark had been the executioner. And Lily had been a pawn, until a dog refused to accept what looked normal. Daniel stepped closer to the bed. You were very brave, he told her. Lily shook her head slightly. I was scared. That's what brave means, Daniel said softly. Atlas let out a slow breath, almost like agreement. 2 weeks later, the snow had melted. The pond at Hawthorne Park was just water again. Calm, reflective, ordinary, but yellow ribbons now lined the fence, not in mourning, in gratitude. The community had gathered that morning for something simple. Not a parade, not a ceremony with flashing cameras, just people. Parents holding children's hands a little tighter. Neighbors who once hurried past each other now standing shoulder to shoulder. At the center stood Lily, healthier now. Color back in her cheeks. She held a small, framed photo. Atlas sat beside her. Composed as always. The mayor finished speaking about vigilance and justice and community responsibility. Then Lily stepped forward. Her voice wasn't loud. But it carried. Atlas didn't let them pretend, she said. A murmur moved through the crowd. He didn't let it look like an accident. Daniel felt his throat tighten. Lily looked down at Atlas. You knew, she said simply. Atlas tilted his head slightly. Cameras flashed softly. But what mattered wasn't the attention. It was the truth. Mark Ellison had pled guilty. Victor Hale faced multiple charges including conspiracy, attempted homicide, and digital evidence manipulation. Megan Whitmore had accepted a plea agreement and agreed to testify fully. The custody case had been dismissed entirely. Sarah Whitmore, cleared of all suspicion, stood behind Lily now, one hand resting gently on her shoulder. Justice hadn't come from outrage. It hadn't come from headlines. It came from instinct. From a refusal to look away. After the gathering dispersed, Daniel walked Atlas back toward the cruiser. You could have moved, Daniel murmured quietly. When that SUV came at you, you could have jumped clear. Atlas glanced up briefly, then forward again. Because that wasn't the job. The job wasn't safety. The job was protection. Daniel opened the back door of the cruiser. Atlas paused, looked back once toward the pond, toward the playground, toward the place where a story almost ended differently. Then he stepped inside. Calm. Certain. As Daniel closed the door, he reflected on something he'd learned that night. Evil doesn't always show itself loudly. Sometimes it dresses as concern. Sometimes it hides behind cameras and carefully written headlines. Sometimes it pretends to be a game. But loyalty doesn't pretend. Instinct doesn't negotiate. And courage doesn't wait for permission. Atlas hadn't known about custody battles. He hadn't understood media manipulation. He didn't need to. He felt the shift, the wrongness, and he acted. Because sometimes the difference between tragedy and survival is one soul who refuses to ignore what others overlook. As the cruiser pulled away from Hawthorne Park, the water in the pond reflected the sky. Clear, still, honest. And beside Daniel, Atlas rested his head, not in exhaustion, but in quiet satisfaction. Another life guarded, another truth protected. Another reminder that trust, once earned between human and dog, becomes something stronger than fear, something stronger than deception, something stronger than ice. And somewhere behind them, a little girl slept peacefully. Because one police dog would not walk away.